I think it's safe to say that Dark Souls 2 is not the most loved game in the Souls franchise. And by big surprise, it's one of the most hated. And honestly, it does hurt me a little to see that, because I really do love Dark Souls 2. It is the one Souls game that I can continuously come back to and have a blast. And honestly, I like this game so much, I'd go as far to say as this is my favorite Souls game, probably besides Elden Ring. Okay, that was a weirdly long and specific intro, but nonetheless, in today's video, I'm going to be just giving a kind of essay or just overview about Dark Souls 2 in like, I guess, an essay format, where I'm just going to be pointing out what people say is really bad, pointing out what people say is really good, or just pointing out what people say about this game, and I'll be like giving my opinions on what they say about it. And my main goal for this video is just to spread some light on Dark Souls 2, so if you've never played this game, or you don't want to give this game a chance, or you stopped halfway through, hopefully I can give you the courage to try this game out and just play a little bit more, because trust me, this game is very good. And if you've already played this game and you really love this game, just watch the video, just cuz. And before we get started, please make sure to like and subscribe and just comment your opinion on Dark Souls 2, or just comment your opinion on anything I say that just provokes a thought, provokes an electric spark in your mind that wants you to say something. And let's just dive in. Firstly, I want to talk about the unique features or mechanics of Dark Souls 2, which I think are definitely parts of the reason why people don't like this game, or parts of the reason why people love this game. And honestly, most of these features were included in Elden Ring, besides probably bonfire aesthetics and maybe some other minor ones. So I guess I'll just start listing new mechanics and new types of things happening in Dark Souls 2 and just say what I think about them. Firstly, the Pharaoh's Lockstone. I really think this is a pretty unique thing in Dark Souls 2 that hasn't been in any other Souls games besides Elden Ring, which is basically a key that you can buy or find throughout the world that unlocks things. So for this, you put it in like this mouth. I used to think it was a mouth, but I guess it's just like a 3-hole thing. You put it in there, it'll unlock a secret, such as an illusionary wall that you couldn't even break beforehand, or just some water to heal you, and small little fun things like that. It's nothing game-changing, but I think it's a nice little unique fun aspect to Dark Souls 2. Secondly, Fragrant Branches of Yore. Now, I can see how Fragrant Branches of Yore could be a little bit annoying, because they do gatekeep a lot of important bosses and things like that, but it's not like you have to go out of your way to find these bad boys or buy them and spend an extraordinary amount of souls on them. I almost said runes there. But you can just find these throughout just progressing the game. Like, you don't have to go out of your way. Like, you will just find them by just walking throughout the game normally. So I think that kind of takes care of that problem. And if you do have extras, you can use that to unlock little secret passageways that usually lead to having an extra Estus Flash Shard, which I think is pretty cool. Next, there is adaptability. Now, adaptability I'm not too keen on. As much as I love Dark Souls 2, I can admit when it does things not so well. And although I don't hate adaptability, I don't really like it either. I think I'm kind of in the middle for it. I feel as if you're a new player coming into this game, you don't know what adaptability is. I think it is more of a negative thing, because to a certain extent, it kind of gets rid of skill, and it just kind of makes it feel a little unfair if you have very low adaptability. And that's because adaptability upgrades your rolling frames, or whatever you want to call it, every time you level it up. So at a certain point, if you have very little of it, like, you're gonna get hit even though you should kind of be rolling through that attack. And although I do think this is a problem, I don't think it is as much of a problem as people think it is, because you can really tell if you shouldn't have gotten hit, and I'm assuming people would look that up, like, why are they getting hit when they shouldn't be, and the answer is on the internet. And once you figure out that answer, in Dark Souls 2 early game, you get a shit ton of souls in Dark Souls 2 early game. Like, you're gonna be level 40 within a couple hours. So you can easily, and I mean easily, dump 10 or 15 stats into adaptability and call it a day and have no other worries. And honestly, that is not that crazy to do, because considering this game, when you level up, it's not as much as a increase by the prior Souls games. Like, I'm assuming the prior Souls games like times this by 1.05 every time you level up. Or in this game, every time you level up, it barely increases, which I think is very good for leveling up your character and going to New Game Pluses, which makes fighting bosses and enemies in New Game Plus, which I'll get into later, a lot more rewarding and fun. Next, there is hollowing. So every time you die in this game, unless you have a certain ring that prevents it or just nullifies the effects to a certain extent, you will lose health. Like, you will lose permanent health. I mean, not permanent, but like, you won't be able to surpass a certain health even if you heal up, which goes all the way down to 50% of your health, which could be annoying, but I really do think it is a fair aspect that is very fitting for Souls games. I guarantee you, if this was in Dark Souls 3 or Dark Souls 1, people would be loving this. Because in Dark Souls 1, you have the exact same thing happen to you by one of those frogs, which is obviously harder to get cursed than just to regularly die, but it immediately gets you to half health, and like, you have no clue how to reverse it. You have to go like across the map to get this item, then go back to the asylum and cure it, which is so much of a nuisance. Like, but that doesn't really get talked about that much. And obviously there are ways to prevent this hollowing. First off, you can just learn what you're doing wrong and just get better at the game, or you can just use a human effigy, which are really not that rare in this game, to give you back to the full limit, or you can just use a ring, which only lets you go down to 75% at the lowest. And honestly, if I had the choice, I would keep this feature in the game, because I think it is a perfect fit for this game. Then there's bonfire aesthetics, which I think is the best aspect to this game. Now basically, if you don't know, if you haven't played Dark Souls 2 or just haven't heard of it, a bonfire aesthetic is basically a New Game Plus in a little bundle. You can put it on a bonfire, and it sets the area like next to that bonfire or within that bonfire in New Game Plus, which I think is probably the best new aspect of Dark Souls 2, because you don't have to go throughout a whole new game. Like, you don't have to beat the game and go throughout every single area again just to go to New Game Plus. You can just put it on that bonfire, fight the boss that you want, you get a shit ton of souls, fight some new enemies, fight those red phantoms, all fun and good, and get new items without having to do this annoying ass process, which I love. And the last thing I like about it is that you can't absolutely abuse it, because first off, there's not that many bonfire aesthetics in the game. You don't really get them till later, so you can't just overpower at the beginning. And some items like Wrath of Gods is actually tied behind the real New Game Plus. So you actually have to beat the game and to go into New Game Plus 2 times before you get that actual spell, which I think is pretty cool. And now I just want to talk about 2 other new aspects to Dark Souls 2, and the first one being soul memory. Now this is the first aspect of Dark Souls 2 that I just really think is useless. It serves no purpose, and it is just all negatives. I get how in the other Souls games you could kind of overpower quickly and then just not level up and to do PvP at a low level and shit on everybody. But you gotta find some other variation than doing this, because this allows for like no co-op. Like, you have to be in very similar soul memory than your friend to play with him. I think that's kind of annoying, because level you can control. Like, when you kill an enemy, it just ups your soul memory, and that is super annoying for PvP and for PvE. PvP and co-op, which just makes the game a lot more dead. Like, there is barely anyone doing PvP and barely anyone summoning people, because it's so hard to do, especially when there's covenants tied behind online systems. With a system like soul memory, it kind of negates and ruins the whole thing. And lastly, the New Game Plus system. Now, the New Game Plus system is something I will constantly glaze till I die. It has done New Game Plus by far, and I mean by far, without a doubt, the best that any other Souls game has done. And that is because of a couple reasons I'll go over real nice and quick. Firstly, new enemies. In New Game Plus, not only do like the bosses get stronger, the enemies get stronger, but there are these red phantoms, and there's like different enemy placement, more enemies, and like these red phantoms, it's not like they overwhelm you. Like, they'll put like 1 or 2 in each new area, but they are very strong and they are very scary, which honestly just makes it, while you're exploring this area, have a lot more emotions and feel like everything is a lot more risky. Secondly, items. There's so many new, like, in different items tied behind New Game Plus. Like, there's so many, there's like actual weapons and spells that you can only get in New Game Plus, and not just rings, which I think is absolutely phenomenal. It just gives you a reason to play New Game Plus. And also, I know there is a weapon, I don't know if there's any spells and any other items, but there's a weapon that gets stronger every time you go to New Game Plus, which I think is fucking sick. Like, that's really cool and just gives you more incentive to play the game again. And lastly, the level up system. In this game, as I said before, you don't level up as fast, which means going to New Game Plus isn't useless. Like, the bosses that give you more souls will actually be useful, because leveling up doesn't cost as much. Like, once you get to level 200 in every other Souls game, it is an absurd amount of fucking souls that New Game Plus cannot cover. And in this game, not only can you level up, because the souls barrier isn't that much, level ups actually do more in this game. Like, level ups don't get soft capped as easily, and I just really love how you can go to New Game Plus and get your character super fucking strong. And I'm gonna go a little bit out of order on stuff I want to talk about, because this thing is just really getting on my nerves and I just gotta let it out there. Dark Souls 2 is a game that is constantly being flamed for just, how not good it is. And I think a lot of the reasons of what people say, and I've just read comments and shit like that, is saying how they'll just toss in ganks and overwhelm you with enemies in this game, and how it's just not fucking fair and it's not fun. And I personally just think that is incorrect. Every single Souls game is going to give you a group of enemies to fight at some point. Like, Dark Souls 2 doesn't even do that to an extraordinary amount. Like, almost every other Souls game gives you as many enemies at the same time. It's a shit ton of enemies, and you just have to deal with it. And people deal with it in all the other games, but they just think because it's Dark Souls 2, they can just run past everything and not get punished like you can in the other Souls games. Dark Souls 2 is a lot more of a strategic and thought out Souls game where the environment actually means stuff. So in Dark Souls 2, you actually have to play smart and kill the enemies. Dark Souls 2 is not just a game all about the bosses, which I feel like a lot of the Souls gaming community only gives a shit about. Dark Souls 2 gives you the ability to deal with ganks. Like, they give you tons of different spells, they give you items to bait them, and like you can just use your terrain to bait the enemies and shit like that. Like, there's so many different ways to deal with ganks, and there's no excuse not to be able to deal with one. The only reason the only example of this that I think is very hard to deal with in gank no matter what is in the Shrine of Amana. You're like towards the end and there's like those 3 knights and the 1 archer girl at the back. Like, that is super hard to deal with, but usually I can deal with that on the first try if I'm just patient and I just use some fucking strats and I use my brain. And now it is time to talk about the bosses of Dark Souls 2, which is a low light in a lot of people's eyes, and I will be not the first one to admit that the bosses could be improved upon. But I'm going to talk a little bit in depth of why they're not as bad as people say they are. Firstly, unlike Dark Souls Remastered, where Beta Chaos is probably the most annoying and one of the hardest bosses for no reason, because it just sucks, in this game, all the shitty bosses are not only optional, well, for the most part, they're optional, but they're super easy. Like, the two main ones that I can probably think of are Prowling Magus and Covetous Demon, which technically are optional bosses, but even though they fucking suck, they're super easy. You'll just wipe them out. So it's better to be killing the fucking horrible boss easily and getting it over with than having to deal with it. I mean, you guys know what I'm saying. Okay. Secondly, the bosses are pretty unique. I think they all have a shit ton of unique attacks and stuff like that, and I just think they are downplayed a lot by the movement system, which I will talk about later. And I also think, the encounters with these boss fights are really cool. You'll fight Pursuer once, and then the rest of the game, he'll be stalking you. He'll just come up to you at random areas. And also, a little other thing, in New Game Plus, you'll fight 2 of them in New Game Plus, which is another little added thing on New Game Plus, and you'll encounter the Duke's Deer Freya beforehand on New Game Plus. So yeah, just wanted to slide that out there because I forgot about that. And yeah, the way you just encounter these bosses are super cool. I just think they're all really unique, and they just are very memorable. And I really feel like they're memorable because they match their area. If it's a prison-themed area like how the Lost Bastille is, the Sinner is an imprisoned person, so they match their area really well. And also in terms of coloring, I think this game really does coloring well. I guess I am just a sucker for turning up saturation, but it just makes everything so much more vibrant and just makes everything just look better, in my opinion. And I think this is a perfect leeway into the areas. And what makes this game special, in my opinion, is the areas. That is the one thing that'll always make me coming back to Dark Souls 2. And what I'm meaning by areas right now is kind of vague. I'm not just talking about how they look and stuff, I'm talking about how they play out and what is in them. Firstly, the areas in Dark Souls 2 all look super unique and they're just super detailed. And they have the best environment. You can use your environment to your advantage here. Every enemy is supposed to be dealt with in a way that your environment corresponds with it, which kind of means a whole bunch of nothing, but the environmental puzzles in this game are crazy. Each different area will have its own little gimmick and its own little puzzle, which I feel like no other Souls game has. In Dark Souls Remastered, Sense Fortress has, the axes and, how it's a trap house, and I guess Anor Londo could be classified as, the archers and shit like that, but besides that, there's not many other areas that have their own unique things, whereas in Dark Souls 2, there's every single area has a little puzzles. How even areas like Forest of the Fallen Giants doesn't really have, a huge and important symbolized gimmick, but it's just a bunch of overlapping different routes that have tons of shortcuts and stuff like that, which shows how even areas like that aren't known for their gimmicks and their unique puzzles still have some environmental uniqueness and difficulty to it, which I do really love. But there is still so many areas with their own unique gimmicks, such as the Lost Bastille, where you have to ring that bell at the end of the area to get a boat to come in, and you fight the boss on that boat, such as Hate's Tower of Flame, where the enemies here, there's these really strong white knights that don't activate till you kill one of the bosses, so you gotta kill the other boss first. That way it's not a huge hassle. And in Hate's Tower of Flame, where you have to pull those levers to make the boss fight arena bigger, which you don't have to do if you want to cheese the boss. I also love Dragon Lake Castle with all those Souls gimmicks where you have to kill an enemy near this item to activate and power it, burning the giant windmill in the poison area, avoiding the throwing axes and traps in the doors of Pharos, and getting surprise attacked and violently raped by the invisible men in that one forest. But although these are really fun and unique things to their area, I don't think these are what makes the area fun. In my opinion, what makes just exploring the area fun is how hard it is. In almost every other Souls game, the difficulty just comes from the bosses. Where in this Souls game, I think the bosses are pretty fucking easy, but the difficulty comes throughout the area. And honestly, I enjoy that almost just as much. In every other Souls game, if it's not my first playthrough, I literally just find myself running past every single area. Or in this game, I'm on my 10th playthrough, and I still kill every enemy, just because it is such a risk. There's a good chance I die, and it's just scary, it's fun, and it just makes me want to do this shit, because it's there's importance to it. I don't want to die. There's so many new items to get, considering, it's New Game Plus and stuff like that. Just makes exploring the area super fun. Which also just leads me on a short little detour about collecting weapons, armors, and spells. I don't know what it is, but something about Dark Souls 2 always keeps me coming back. And I think the main reason for that is to collect shit. I don't know why, but every weapon and armor set and spells, but mostly the weapon and armors, just look and feel so unique that I want to collect them all, which also leads me to playing different playthroughs and shit with those weapons and with those armors. But I will literally just find myself coming back to Dark Souls 2 every probably 2 weeks or just a couple times a month to play for a couple hours just to collect some new weapons and new armors. But I don't know why I do that. It's just something I love doing just for Dark Souls 2. The next thing I want to talk about is the lore and just atmosphere of Dark Souls 2. Firstly, it's not really as connected as Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 3 are together, which I think deters a lot of people from this game and just, they kind of don't think as much of it because of that. But honestly, I personally enjoy that more. I just feel like going through the games, especially like when you're at Majula, it doesn't really feel like a safe haven. Although I do think it's the best hub, it kind of feels like you're a traveler there, like you're just passing by, which I still don't mind. And I feel like that kind of sums up the vibe of all Dark Souls 2. It doesn't feel like you're this big hotshot like you are in Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 3. You're meant to, like, you know, be the chosen one and yada yada. I feel like in this game you're kind of a nobody. And like the lore just kind of shows that too. Like you're just like a passenger and just like a traveler going through these lands, which really gives this like peaceful and like beautiful aspect to this game in my eyes. I don't know why, I just felt like I had to put that out there. I just like that about it. But I do genuinely think, like, of the lore that we do know, trust me, but I do genuinely think of the lore that we do know, it is really good. Like, the story with the old Iron King and Sir Alone, I think that shit's fucking awesome. And there was one other really good story, I don't remember which one it was, but they just have great symbolism, and like they actually tie into how the game is. Like, I feel like the lore that we know about this game has a much more direct effect on the game. And I can't really like summarize and express like how the feeling of emptiness and like how you're a big old nobody in this game really affects how I feel. But like just the atmosphere of this game just feels so unique and different to the other games. And I guess I'll shortly summarize the story of this game. That way maybe you guys can have the feeling too. There was this King of Vendrick who ruled over Dragon Lake Castle, which is basically the Anor Londo. It's like the big main area. And then he meets this girl named Sandra, which is, I'm pretty sure, like part of the Abyss, like part of Manus or some shit like that. He fucks with her, she fucks with him, and like the abyss starts spreading or something, like the curse starts spreading. He was scared of the curse, so she convinced him to hide underground where she takes over the castle, and like the curse spreads and shit like that, and you want to stop it. Which I feel like kind of shows how you're doing all this for nothing, because like although you can like reclaim the castle and make a giant fucking thriving city, like the abyss or the curse, whatever, is so powerful and crazy that like, all that will just fall over the slightest thing. And I also just don't know why, but all this, like the story, the effect, how you play through the game, just kind of creates a feeling of sadness, especially towards the end of the game, which is obviously just a great thing how a game like this can just give you emotions, have this type of impact on you. And I guess this is the perfect time to go over the DLCs. Like every other Souls game, the DLCs is probably the highlight of the game, with crazy new bosses, crazy new areas, and just tons of unique and cool shit to do. And the great thing about Scholar of the First Sin, which I'm pretty sure is the Souls game that most of them have, the DLC comes free. I also do like how you find the keys in like different areas. They're scattered throughout the world, which I think is a fun way to like unlock the DLC to show that you've like earned it or whatever, yada yada. And I think it is a better way of doing it in the Dark Souls 1, because in this game you can actually like find the keys on your own. Like some of them, or like at least 2 of them, you'll most likely find on your own. Whereas Dark Souls Remastered is that crazy ass story and fucking obscene things that you had to do. And just about the DLCs, I think progressing through them is probably the highlight of them. Like, as I said before, I just love going through these areas, but especially the Poison DLC, I don't know what it was about it. Like, there's so many unique little intricate puzzles where you had to like hit those things that like moved they moved buildings around, which has allowed for so many cool different paths, so many cool different ways to explore the area. And especially when you got to the second half with those invisible guys that are basically immune to you and will fuck you up unless you find their like hidden source, which you have to break. And also like how there's tons of other hidden puzzles in the Poison DLC. The bosses there were kind of mediocre. The gank boss isn't as bad as people say. I still kind of liked it a little bit, but you know, I didn't really like Sin that much. And Alana, she was fun, but she was nothing crazy. The Ivory DLC is probably the best in my opinion. You start off on a giant tower and you descent your way down with tons of different puzzles, gimmicks, and unique different mobs. It is so cool. And then Fume Knight at the end is probably the best boss in Dark Souls 2 in my opinion. It's a super fun and a super hard boss fight. Then there's a snowy one, which I also love, but the Frigid Outskirts is such a horrible fucking area. I just hate that area. And obviously the DLC is going to be the best part of Dark Souls 2. It's got the best bosses, the best areas, and the best thing about it, like I said earlier, is that it's free, so there's no excuse not to play the DLC. If you haven't yet, I recommend you do that. And I guess from now on, for at least the most of the rest of the video, I'll be just talking about what people hate about it, and I'll be trying to defend it. Firstly, Iron Keep. Now, people just hate this area in terms of, I guess, a shit ton of enemies running at you and I guess falling in the lava. But bro, this area is not bad. If you just actually take your time and kill the enemies, it's still a decently hard area. It's probably going to be one of the harder areas in the game. That is where I died in my no death run. But it's still a very fun area if you actually kill the enemies. There's a couple ganks there, but at most you're getting 1 or 2 enemies at the same time. The real hard part is that little conveyor area with the fucking Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and those knights there, which can be really, really tricky, but dude, you just need some strategy and just have some thought. Same for Shrine of Amana, literally the exact same thing. Just, you gotta use your environment to your advantage and just play smart, which honestly is harder and easier in this game. Like, you need to do it more because in this game, I'm pretty sure the AI is hella advanced. Like, I'm pretty sure, unlike Elden Ring, which the AI is fucking retards, in this game, the AI is fucking advanced. Like, they know how to climb ladders, they know how to navigate the area to get where you're at, which is honestly super cool and super scary, but that just means you need to play smarter. And I also think the interconnectivity of Dark Souls 2 is low-key kind of underrated. And this really shines in the Sunken King, where there's so many different paths, different shortcuts, like the buildings and all that stuff. It's just so interconnected. I think it's definitely a lot more interconnected than Dark Souls 3. And this game, in terms of like content, it's just so packed to the brim. Like, there's so many like cool and quests and just like different things to do that you wouldn't know about. Like the mansion in Majula, you need to find a key to that from a random geeker in Forest of the Fallen Giants, and like you get a really cool armor set at the end of the DLC if you kill the knights in the boss arena like 50 times to get 50 of their souls, or whatever you want to call it. Like, there's so many unique little things like that which aren't on the surface. Like, you have to dive deep to find, but they're super rewarding and just like super cool things like that. Are they didn't need to do, but they just did that like to just reward you and give you more content if you actually like play the game with depth and try to see what you're doing. Some more examples of that could be when you put on Velstat's armor during the Fume Knight fight. The Fume Knight would automatically enter the second phase and go crazy, because in the lore, the Fume Knight and Velstat had some altercations between Velstat on like trust or some shit, I don't know, but that's just like cool little detail. And like how Sura alone will stab himself and commit seppuku, whatever you want to call it, if you no-hit him, which are all just like not that significant things, but they're super cool and just the little things, am I right? And before we end this video off, I want to talk about some actual important things, such as quality of life changes. In this game, you don't have to rest at the bonfire to reverse hollowing, which obviously isn't that important, but it's a nice little quality of life aspect. Such as this being the first game to reset / respec stats, which is huge, and just having like more and different types of consumables. Next, I want to talk about a big part of why people don't like this game, probably the main reason, and that is the movement system. This game's movement, I will admit, feels pretty slippery, and I don't necessarily like it, but it's one of those things where you can master and get the hang of it. Like, now when I play Dark Souls 2, I don't really notice it, but I can see how that can be very annoying at the beginning. Because sometimes, like, it just feels like you're sliding off shit if you do, like, a quick turn. Like, you can just, like, walk off stuff and, like, roll off stuff. It doesn't feel like you've got, like, good sturdy shoes on the ground. It feels like you have no grip on the floor that you're walking on. And also the animations, like, I don't know exactly what it is, but, like, you, like, queue it up and you can't cancel it or some shit like that, which does lead to a lot of deaths, and it leads to the game being a little bit slower paced. Also, the direction of the attacks. I'm pretty sure in this game and Dark Souls 1, you can only do attacks in, like, or maybe just this game, in, like, 4 or 8 directions, which obviously is pretty annoying, which I'm pretty sure is also the same for rolling and just walking, which I'm pretty sure contributes to the animations and just movement feeling slippery. And I really do just have no defense for that. I'm just saying it will get better if you actually play the game. You'll start noticing less and less, and I'm pretty sure adaptability might help with that. Don't take my word for that. The next thing I want to talk about is hitboxes. Now, hitboxes in this game are, in my opinion, nowhere near as bad as what people say they are. I think the main point that they use to show how bad hitboxes are the Fume Knight. Like, when he puts that buff on his sword, which I can see how that could be bad hitboxes, but, like, you can see the effect of his sword. Like, they're, like, complaining how it hits them, but, like, the flame, like, on the sword hits them. And obviously, hitboxes are not going to be that good if you don't have a lot of adaptability, which I can't really excuse either, but that's just how the way the game goes. But for the most part, I don't think hitboxes are that bad in this game. There's a couple instances that you will find here and there, but you'll find bad hitbox instances in almost every game. Maybe in this game it is a winkle bit more prevalent than others. And now I want to talk about the emphasis on consumables, which by that I mean life gems, simpleton spice, and bright bugs and shit like that. There's a lot more cool consumables in this game. There's some that you can just use to refresh your spells and refresh your health and just shit like that, which is really cool. The first one I want to talk about, which is probably the main consumable in Dark Souls 2, is the life gems. At first I thought the life gems were the entire source of healing, which really pissed me off, but then I figured out it's just like a backup healing, which I kind of do like, because you don't get that many heals in Dark Souls 2, and they don't heal so much, so I like that they give you a lot weaker thing that you have to pay for to have a secondary heal, which can just help you be more prepared, and it isn't absolutely necessary. I do really enjoy that. Secondly, the simpleton spice, which I think is a really cool aspect, and what you can do with this is apply this to spells and miracles and just shit like that to lower the requirements of how much, like, you know, it costs to use, or like how much faith and intelligence it costs to use them, which I think would be really cool in every other game besides Dark Souls 2 because of soul memory. I feel like the one purpose for this would to, have a good spell at a low level, which obviously doesn't matter in Dark Souls 2 because it's just based off of soul memory. But nonetheless, I think that is cool. And the last main consumable that I want to talk about is the Bright Bug, which I think is really cool. It like buffs your defenses and damage and just like resistances by 20%. It's a pretty OP buff, but it's really rare to come by, and it's just a limited time buff, which I thought was really cool. And then there was power stancing, which was super unique to the game, and I always forget like this was a thing, but this is such a huge, like, cool, I mean, it's not that crazy, but it's a pretty cool thing that they didn't have to add, but they just did, just for more detail and more content. And that is that you can use 2 weapons at the same time. In Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 3, you can only either slash with your left, slash with your right, or two-handed and use both hands. In this game, you can use a weapon on your left and your right at the same time, as long as they're the same weapon type, so if they have the same moveset. And you have 1.5 times the stat requirements, and I'm pretty sure just strength. Like, you might have to have 1.5 in dex too, but I'm pretty sure if you just have 1.5 in strength, you can dual wield that weapon and just do twice the damage, but it also requires twice the stamina. So if you are later in the game, this is pretty viable, and this is pretty cool. And then I want to talk about memories. Mostly memories of the giants, but in the DLC there is one memory you can go to, and these are just like a really cool aspect of Dark Souls 2, which is super unique and super fun. And I think you can find these trees in Dark Souls 3, but I'm getting sidetracked. Nonetheless, this is a little... It's not like a super important thing, but it's relatively important, but not mandatory. You can enter these trees once you get to a certain point in the game. You talk to that giant dragon, get a seal or something, just like, I don't know, you need to obtain an item that allows you to transcend through time or some shit. But you can find these trees and go back to the past and fight a boss in the past and just explore in the past, which is really cool. And since it's like the past, you have a limited time, so you have to do all this shit in like under 3 minutes, which I really appreciate. It's just super cool, super fun, and super unique. Then there's the dragon area, which is towards the end of the game, which is just such a cool fucking area. It's like you see all these dragons flying in the air. It's just a scene. You see the giant castle. You also find those knights that won't attack you unless you like play unfaithfully towards the enemies. Like if you run past the enemies, they'll all attack you. But if you fight the main enemies, like these dragon knights will just let you by, which is super cool. Then there's Alia's Keep, which is probably one of my favorite areas in the Soul series, and I think one of the most unique areas in the Soul series. And it's just like a giant lab. It's like where Alia had his little pets, like his little experiments, which is super cool. It's kind of scary. You see all these different monsters locked up in cages, how like fucked up this guy was. It's just super cool and super scary. I love how if you light the 4 torches, like this dragon, this bone dragon comes alive and fucking one-shots you, and how Forlon invades all those places. And those hidden mirror knights and those hippopotamus jump scares. I love that shit so much. And lastly, the last thing in this entire video that I want to talk about is the mirror knight. I love this boss fight. Obviously, I just love the area. I love the arena. I just love his attacks. But he has such a unique mechanic where around halfway, he'll throw his giant black shield down and he can summon an actual player. Like, you gotta put a sign down next to the boss log, and there's a chance he'll just summon you to help him fight an actual player, which is really cool. And obviously, if there's no one there, he'll just use an NPC. And that was really about it for all I had to say for Dark Souls 2. If you can tell, I really love this game. I have a lot of time in this game, and I hope you guys give this game a chance or just play it more. It's a great game. Any final thoughts that I have is just fucking play this game. It's a great game. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.